distinguished guests, professors, fellow academic and researchers, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer, UCAM YSD Chair in Climate Change and Institute of Climate Change for inviting me and organizing this event. I am very honored. And I also would like to thank all the participants, especially from the representatives of private sectors, IHE corporations, our Japanese friends, as well as representative from the TNB Research, representative from the NAHRIM, our research collaborators, as well as from representative from Sanway University, and also representative from all over other universities and UCAMs. So thank you very much for your presence. Today, the topic I'm going to talk on economics of climate change, which I have been working for more than 12 years. The topic is really complex and dynamic. However, the issues and my thoughts and some of our research on the relevance of these topics I'm going to share with you, which are really quite emerging and interesting. So just quickly go through the contents of this public lecture. So I will just go over overview of the economics of sustainable development, where the economics of climate change are coming from. Okay. Then I will go to elaborate some of the issues of climate change from the global to regional and to the national Malaysian perspectives, where I will talk about the greenhouse gas emissions, adaptations, vulnerability, and then emission reduction targets. The most important part I'm going to talk here today is the policy approach and economic instruments. This is the most crucial for the economics of climate change topic. So where I will also talk about some of the economic instruments and policy instruments, cost of mitigation and adaptation. Later on, I am going to share some of our research findings as well as ongoing research on economics of climate change, what we are doing here. And then I will conclude some of the issues and considerations for the transition to a low carbon and sustainable economy. So the issue is, all of us know about the sustainable development. Sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future generations. So here we always forget when we talk about the sustainable development, about the future generations. So that the remarkable is the development is not considering for us, those are present in this world, also for the future generations, those will be coming to live in this planet. So the three major dimensions of sustainable development is economic, social, and environmental. And the fourth one is institutional or governance, which is cross-dimensional among other three. So my focus will be on economics of sustainable development, where economic is connected or interrelated with society as well as environment. So how economics talks with the society and environment. Okay, so the economic activities, the productions, distributions, manufacturing, and consumptions, disposal, all are economic activities, has an impact on the environment, such as pollutions, emissions, and resource allocations. Okay. At the same time, economic also has provides the society about the the incomes, equity, employment, all this. At the same time, environment, the surroundings we are living here, the environment also has impact on the economy. That, for example, natural resources provide carbon sinks, livelihoods, employment. So, and also society has some interactions with the economy, because society has not only some very, very important, because society provides the labor, provides the educations, provides the consumptions patterns, provides all. So these two major aspects, economics with the society, economics with the environment, will be part of the economics of sustainable development. The problems, the global, all of us are facing now, there are many problems. I just would like to mention a few of them. The poverty and hunger, pollution, human health and food security, loss of biodiversity, deforestation. Climate change is one of the major problems we are facing now, which is the 13th SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. As all of us know that in 2015, the UN Summit on Sustainable Development Goals has 17 initiatives, followed by the Millennium Development Goals. So climate change is the number 13th initiative on SDGs. We are also very frequently facing frequent climate and natural disasters, which are also relevant few of the SDGs. SDG 9 is resilient infrastructure, SDG 11 is resilient cities and human settlements. So the issues when we are coming about the economics of sustainable development, the economics are facing the problem is how to meet the growing world demand, which will conserve the earth and its resources, at the same time will empower people to meet the present and future needs. So this seems to be very, simple questions, but it is really challenging for the economics to address on it. So here are some of at the bottom of this slide, some of the topics or issues I have mentioned what we are working on it under the economics of sustainable development. The production and use of natural resources, assessing environmental impacts, environmental valuation, policy response, climate and disaster resilience, sustainable community externality, and market opportunities. So these are some topics relevant to the economics of sustainable development. At the same time, is relevance to the economics of climate change. Okay, so while I will be talking about the economics of this lecture, I will be referring to IPCC. So many of you may know that IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the body of scientific body, okay? Those provides evidences on the climate change issues. That means the climate change is happening, how to respond, what are the impacts we are facing. So this is the body. So you can have a look that IPCC was established in 1988, and since then IPCC has five regular assessment reports. So the first IPCC's report was on the 1990, and then the second IPCC's report was 1995. So the interval was like 5 to 6 years. So the latest IPCC's report was on 2013 and 2014, where I was also blessed to contribute on the IPCC's as a contributing author for the working group to impacts, adaptation and vulnerability. So just take a note that IPCC has regular reports on 3 major issues based on 3 working groups. So first working group 1 provides the physical science basis, that means the science of climate change. Okay. The second working group will provide the impacts, adaptation and vulnerability. So they will see that what are the impacts of climate change, what are the vulnerability we are facing, and then and also what should we do, how to adapt to reduce this vulnerability. IPCC, the working group 3 will usually reports on mitigation of climate change. Just take note that mitigation is reduction of greenhouse gases emissions in relevance to climate change. Okay. So I will be referring also UNFCCC, which stands for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was established after the IPCC's first assessment reports in 1990. So UNFCCC bodies are unlike IPCC, they are the governmental bodies where every country under the United Nations has been signed, and at the beginning about 194 nations was signed in 1992, but now I think they have members 196 countries. So these bodies are basically negotiate about the climate change, and also they provide the decisions what should we do as a global community, all the countries and this one. So later on I will elaborate some of the decisions or negotiations that came from the UNFCCC. So the remarks is here, IPCC is the scientific body, even though they do not do their own research, but they review from the research findings from all over the world. And UNFCCC is the government's body who decide actions on the climate change. So coming to the climate change and global and regional perspectives, this issue is crucial because whenever we are going to take the actions or decisions addressed to the national level, we need to refer back to the global and regional levels as well. So according to the IPCC's latest report, the 5th assessment report on the working group 1 is the physical science. They have reported in 2013 that warming of the climate system is unequivocal. That means there is no doubt climate change is happening. Okay, and many of the observed climate changes, observed means which we already have experienced, already observed. So no prediction is here. Many of the climate change observed are unprecedented, which means we have never faced these changes. We have never experienced before these changes. Okay, so therefore atmosphere and ocean are warmed, amounts of snow and ice are diminished, sea level is risen, concentrations of greenhouse gas emissions are increased. So you can have a look this figure. This is coming from the IPCC's this report, and then almost entire the globe experiences surface warming from above 0.8 to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1.25 degrees Celsius or 5 degrees Celsius. But some of the regions, you can see those are purple colors, are facing more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is 1.75 to 2.5 degrees Celsius. So again, I just would like to mention this, the surface temperature changes based on the more than 100 years, data, and this is based on the observed data. So there is no doubt that we have been facing climate change. Okay, so what causes? We know that is happening. So while it is happening, just have a look. This is again, I am referring the IPCC's 5th assessment report. The more than half of the observed change in global average surface temperature from the last 6 decades was caused by the anthropogenic increase in greenhouse gas concentrations. Anthropogenic increase, that means the human caused. All of us are causing to increase the greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, the alarming point is here. The total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions was the highest in human history from the last decade, 2000 and 2010, which reached a milestone greenhouse gas global ton carbon dioxide equivalence for the 2010. So now, although we have a number of climate change mitigation, that means the emission reduction policies, but annual greenhouse gas emissions grew on average 2.2% from the last decade compared to the 3 decades before the last decade, 1.3%. So you can see the percentage changes of greenhouse gas emissions or concentrations is quite high. Okay, so what should we do? The continued emissions of greenhouse gas emissions will cause further climate change or global warming. Therefore, we need to limit that climate change, and therefore it is required to have substantial and sustained reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. So the greenhouse gas emissions from the anthropogenic causes are the main reasons to have the climate change, to cause the climate change. Okay, so later on, what can we do? Yeah, so this framework again coming from the IPCC's report, and then you can have a look here, the climate change. Okay, so we already know that climate change, temperature change, precipitation, that means rainfall change, sea level rise, and other extreme weather conditions. And drivers, we already know about the greenhouse gas emission concentrations and also the emissions. So this is the drivers which cause to climate change. Climate change, when we are facing the climate change, then there will have impacts on all of us, including the ecosystems, water resources, agriculture, human health, and all this. Therefore, there are the vulnerable sectors due to the climate change. And the actions, the responses, what should we do? Two major responses, you can just take note. One is adaptations, which are the responses or measures we can adapt with changing the climate. At the same time, we can exploit the benefits of climate change. So adaptation is one of the major response. The other major response is mitigations, which I have mentioned earlier, is reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so let's have a look some of the the impacts on vulnerable sectors. So, thank you for your patience. So, we have seen the impacts of climate change are already happening, and we are facing that impacts coming from the ecosystems, humans, flora, fauna, all the sectors, even the polar bears and all of them. So now, is it we only should do the mitigations to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, or we should adapt? So I think that the issue is we need to have balance between mitigation and adaptation measures, which are complementary strategies for reducing the risks and vulnerability and reducing the impacts of climate change. So the facts is from the global greenhouse gas emissions, that these two figures as from the IPCC's report again, but you can have a look this 2000, and this one is 2010. Almost the same trends of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from which sectors? You can see the major sectors of greenhouse gas coming from the energy sectors, especially electricity and heat productions, followed by agricultural, forestry and other land use, as well as from the industry and transport sectors. So these are the major sectors contributing to the most of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Coming from the data of regional perspectives, this is coming from the ADB's study, the recent study from ADB. So the countries are included Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand and Vietnam. So the report shows that 90% of greenhouse gas emissions in Southeast Asia coming from these 5 countries. Okay, and then emissions growth in this region as fast as economic growth. You can see nearly 5% annual increase in greenhouse gas emissions over the last 2 decades. So that means the similar patterns we can see from the global and regional perspective as well. And you can see the most of the emissions in this region are coming from land use changes, as is followed by electricity and heat, that means the energy, and transportation and manufacturing and construction sector. So these 4 are the major sectors contributing to the regional greenhouse gas emissions. In terms of total greenhouse gas emissions, you can have a look. The Indonesia is the highest emitter, followed by Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam and Philippines. And in terms of per capita greenhouse gas emissions, definitely Malaysia is the highest because Malaysia population is much lower than Indonesia, followed by Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam and Philippines. So now is the issue here is as an economist, you want to see the global emissions, total greenhouse gas emissions, the amount of the greenhouse gas emissions contributing to the atmosphere, global atmosphere, or you would like to see the per capita greenhouse gas emissions. So these are the issues we really need to take considerations for future works of any decisions. This is just, I would like to show also the carbon emissions from the global countries which are contributing most. This is also quite latest data. You can have a look again. My point is here, the share of world total or per capita emissions. So I will go through the share of world total data. So you can see that China is contributing about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions of the world total, followed by United States 14% and India is around 7%. Russia is also contributing quite high, 5% of the share of total global greenhouse gas emissions. And you can have a look in this region, Indonesia is contributing around 1.4% of the share of global greenhouse gas emissions, and followed by Thailand, and Malaysia is also 0.7% of the total global carbon dioxide emissions sharing. So this is that, when you look about the per capita, this data might be changed because in United States coming to the first contributor in terms of per capita. But if you look at the global share of greenhouse gas emissions that countries are, you can have a look, those are the highest contributor to the global greenhouse gas emissions. Just as I have talked a lot of mitigations and adaptations, so I just would like to put some of the examples of mitigations, especially for the energy sectors, because I have chosen energy sector because energy sector is the most anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission contributor. Okay, so from the supply side, you can see that use of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and also fuel switching in power generations. These are some examples of mitigation measures or practices. From the demand side, especially for the residential and commercial building sector, as some of us may use this one, use of more energy efficient light, bulbs or appliances, zero or low energy buildings. These are some of the examples of mitigation measures in the energy sectors. But I just would like to I just would like to share with you, in terms of cost, the mitigation cost might be different between these measures, between the sectors, because it depends on the which measures, which combination of the mitigation measures you are taking into account and for the which sector. So the cost might be varied. So I come to the risks and vulnerability. You can see this figure showing that climate disasters are affecting more people to the developing countries compared to the developed countries. You can see the huge gaps. So the most vulnerable and also most risk-prone of the climate disasters are recipients from the developing world. However, in terms of adaptations, how we are going to adapt the measures we are taking into account to reduce the risks and vulnerability, again, you can see, have a look that with adaptations and without adaptations, you can see the residual damage cost is huge differences. So with adaptation you can save a huge cost rather than not taking adaptation measures. So you can see that adaptation considers as an investment to reduce the risk and vulnerability due to the climate change and disasters. So again, coming back to the developing countries, adaptation measures are quite weak. So you can see the trade-offs between developed and developing countries in terms of risks, in terms of vulnerability, in terms of the responses. At the same time, in terms of investment. So you can see that the most vulnerable and most risk-prone are least developed and developing countries. So again, just I would like to show some of the examples of adaptation measures. It might be a question to any of you. So there are the autonomous adaptation. That means without any conscious measures taking to reduce the vulnerability, automatically you are responding to the climate change or disasters. So these are the autonomous adaptations. You can have a look, the farmers when they grow, they see the changes of rainfall or drought, they change the crop pattern. They change the planting dates. So these are autonomous adaptation measures, and also natural adaptation measures we can see. And also you can see the plant or policy-driven adaptation measures, that means which are already coming from the policy decisions. From the policy decisions are to take actions of the adaptation measures. Some of the examples is studying of the risk assessment and vulnerability assessment to have the better understanding of the climate change and disasters. So these are the short-term plant adaptations. For the long-term plant adaptation, investment on the major infrastructures such as reservoir storage, increased drainage, higher sea walls. So these are some of the examples, but I just would like to show you that how this picture is showing that the autonomous or natural adaptations. This is one of our research project site is Kelab Golf Pahang in the Pahang state is the coast. We can see that this mangrove plant was automatically adapted with this coast conditions surroundings, and we have these two gentlemen are my colleagues. So this is the mangrove experts. Both of them and all of us were surprised to see how this mangrove was survived in these situations. This is called autonomous adaptations from the plant's perspective. And at the same time, you can see here is the dead shells deposited here. This is also one kind of autonomous adaptations which helps to break the water waves as well as to reduce the erosions at the coast. So this is autonomous or natural adaptations. Okay, and this is here, you can see the picture is not that clear. You can see in this picture here, these are the revetments or groin, we call the concrete wall to reduce the, to protect the embankments of this coast areas. This is plant adaptations. I would like to mention also there is a important adaptation is community-based adaptations, which are gaining very acceptance and support day by day. So because these adaptations are led by the community priorities, needs, knowledge, capacities, and they will empower the community peoples to plan and also to cope with the impacts of climate change. So this is one of the most important adaptation measures which need to be taken into account. Okay, coming back to my main topics, economics of climate change. This is the Eastern Review, which is a very, very invaluable reference to the economics, to refer on the economics of climate change. This report was also in the commissioned by the UNFCCC in 2017. But have a look, the gist of this report. This report is usually 600 pages of this report. It is available on the website, but it's still quite valuable to see that. So you can see if we do not act, the overall cost of climate change will be equivalent to lose at least 5% of global GDP per year now and forever. So 5% of global GDP is going to cost if we do not take actions. On the other hand, if the cost of climate change actions, if to avoid the impacts of climate change can be limited around 1% of global GDP each year. So you can see the trade-offs between taking actions or not taking actions. So you can see the how much cost we can save to take actions. This is again, some of my reviews for IPCC's 5th assessment report, and it was came to the newspapers, the Stars in 2014. You can see the reviews shows that again the ADP's study of in Southeast Asia. At that time, it was 2.2% of GDP cost if you do not take actions in the Southeast Asia, and then you can see the around 1 to 2 billion economic loss due to the drought in northeastern China. And also you can see India also, they are going to cost $7 billion due to the drought in agricultural loss. So you can see the huge costs are imposing due to the climate change in this region. So coming to the latest report ADP, which I was cited in IPCC's report in 2009, it was 2.2% of GDP cost in the Southeast Asia region. But the latest report shows is a big gap, the loss of 11% of GDP by this century if no mitigation actions are taken into account. So Southeast Asia, this study again coming from the 5 countries representing Southeast Asia, going to cost huge 11%. On the other hand, if we're going to take actions of climate change mitigation, the cost might be limited on around 2.5 to 3.5% of GDP. So you can see the huge gaps, huge trade-offs, huge cost might be saved if we take actions to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So coming to the Malaysian's perspective of climate change, this is also important because we are in Malaysia now. Anyway, Malaysia is also experiencing a warming trend for the past few decades, and you can see there this figure shows that observed and projected data on climate change. So this is coming from the Malaysian's reports NC2, which is second national communications, and which is the latest report by the Malaysian government submitted to the UNFCCC in the early January 2011. So this report shows that Malaysia is also based on the observer facing temperature rising 0.6 to 1.2 degrees Celsius and also projected 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. So in terms of rainfall amount, there is not that much difference based on the observed data, but based on the projection, you can see there is some changes in future of the rainfall. Okay, rainfall intensity, there is an increase 17% for the 1 hour duration and quite 30% increase of rainfall for the 3 hour duration. So this is based on the observed. So you can't change the data. And this is the projected also increase in extreme weather conditions and so on. So in terms of sea level rise, according to NC2 in 2011 reported 1.3 millimeter per year in the area of Tanjung Piai, Johor. But I can tell you, we have been working on the sea level rise and other studies. There is coming to the new places in Malaysia to see the sea level rise, risks in some of the coastal areas. I hope some of those studies will be reported into the Malaysia's latest Third National Communications, the TNC. So this is Malaysia's perspective from the institutional arrangement. Have a look that Malaysia has ratified UNFCCC, as I introduced UNFCCC earlier in my slides, in 1994, Kyoto Protocol in 2002. Malaysia's national focal point for climate change is Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. Malaysia so far has two important policies, green technology policy and national policy on climate change, which can address the issues of climate change. And also Malaysia has the highest level of committee is the Green Technology and Climate Change Council Committee, which was established in 2011. Okay, Malaysia has, these are the country documents which are available in the UNFCCC website, at the same time NRE's website as well. So Malaysia has submitted its initial or first national communications in 2000 to the UNFCCC. The second national communication, which is the latest report of the Malaysian government, was submitted in January 2011. Malaysia was also submitted the first biennial update report in 2015, and Malaysia is in preparation of submitting their third national communication, which is due on end of this year. So these are the country documents about the climate change. So if any of you are interested, and please have a look and visit UNFCCC's website or NRE's website. So I'll just go through to give an impression that what is inside the national policy on climate change. The policy statement is ensure climate resilient development to fulfill the national aspirations for sustainable development. There are two major issues has been concerned in the climate change policy, national policy on climate change in Malaysia. One is low carbon economy, the other one is climate resilient development. So these two issues are really, important to address the climate change in Malaysia. So Malaysia's national policy on climate change also address the integrating climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. This is really crucial. I don't know, I will show some of the examples later on. So in terms of some of the data, as we see earlier slides, that what causes climate change. So you can see, have a look, that the trends of GDP, primary energy supply and final energy consumption is quite grown up. You can see in tandem with the GDP growth. So you can see this blue line is the GDP growth, and this green is energy consumptions is also increasing, and this is the red bar is the energy supply. Even though Malaysia has a surplus energy supply, but if the energy demand is really growing very, very fast, you can have a look to see the energy security in the future. So that's the things I just would like to share as we talk about the energy demand and supply. What are the types of energy supplies? The natural gas is the highest, around 47%, and also followed by the crude oil, coke also has, and petroleum products, hydropower and renewables. So renewable has at this moment is contributing less than 1% of the energy sources in Malaysia. So this is remarkable. Although Malaysia, I will share, also has a huge target to increase the renewable energy shares in the energy supply. So coming to the emissions sector from the Malaysians, you can see that again is almost similar to the global and regional trends. You can see the energy sectors are contributing huge greenhouse gas emissions in Malaysia. You can see 76%. in 2011. This is the latest data mentioned in the Banyan Update report in 2015. So followed by, you can say, waste sectors, industrial processes, and agriculture sectors. So energy sector is the main contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in Malaysia. This is just zoom in within the energy sectors. What are the sectors are contributing most to the greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions in Malaysia? You can have a look. The highest contributor coming from the energy industries, which means the power and energy producer, electricity, petroleum, refined natural gas, transport. These are the sectors contributing huge emissions in the Malaysian's greenhouse gas emissions, followed by transport, manufacturing, and construction sectors. So this is the sectors which are contributing to the Malaysian's greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, as Malaysians ratified to the UNFCCC, and also Malaysia's government has some sort of emission reduction commitment or pledge. All of us know that in 2009, during the Conference of Parties COP15 at Copenhagen, Malaysia's Prime Minister has voluntarily committed to reduce the 40% emission intensity of GDP by the year of 2020 compared to the 2005 levels. Here, please mark that this is not an absolute emission reductions. This is an emission intensity of GDP. That means that the total carbon emissions divided by the total GDP. So it's not an absolute emission reduction. However, some of you may not aware that Malaysia has another new commitment or pledge to the emission reduction. Okay, so this is the latest one in the INDC, intended nationally determined contributions. Malaysia has submitted to UNFCCC in 2015. So basically, nationally determined contributions means UNFCCC has been, is like some sort of push to the countries to commit. Every member country should commit to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So it depends on voluntary or basis. So Malaysia again intends to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions intensity of GDP by 45% by 2030 in relatives to the 2005 level. So you can see that this is the new commitment. Many of us know that 40% emission intensity reductions, but there is a new commitment, new pledge on 45% emission intensity reductions. Even though there is a conditions, 35% will be unconditional basis, and another 10% will be based on the climate finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. Okay, so what Malaysian governments or Malaysians, especially governments, are doing on that? So according to the NC2, Second National Commission, Malaysian government also has established some scenarios to reduce the carbon emissions from the energy sector. So you can have a look that these scenarios is based on the promoting or implementing energy efficiency and conservation, especially in the industrial sector and also commercial sectors, and renewable energy, especially for the power generations, and also diesel consumption, percentage of diesel consumption in the transport sectors, and also this combination of these two. So these are the projected scenarios Malaysian government has been taken into consideration to reduce their emissions targets. So, and also I would like to share some of the mitigation policy strategies, which I'm not going to details on that, but just take a note that Malaysia has a fifth fuel policy in 2000. That means the fifth fuel policies are like oil, petroleum gas, coal, and hydro, as well as the new one is renewable. So renewable energy is one of the new energy sources added into Malaysia. It's not the new, it's in 2000, but you can see the renewable energy's capacity and targets. How is it? I will elaborate later on that. There are some progress on the private sector's emission reductions, especially the National Corporate Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program for Malaysia, that is called My Carbon, and other programs as well. There is some tax incentives, that means the economic instruments have been applied to the companies. Those will generate the renewable energy and energy efficiency services will provide. And there is some financial schemes like Renewable Energy Fund under FIT. Many of us know that FIT, and also there is a new energy authority, Sustainable Energy and Development Authority, SEDA, which was established in 2011. Those are interested to know more about the renewable energy, please visit to the SEDA website. There is a huge, information about the renewable energy sources, capacities, projects, licensings, all in this website. Okay, as I mentioned that Malaysia has introduced fifth fuel diversification strategy in 2000. So, but still we can have a look that fossil fuel energy still possesses absolute share of the total energy consumption in Malaysia. So there is something need to work on, especially on the renewable energy sectors. Okay, so under the feed-in tariff, you can see that many of you may observe that Malaysia, under this feed-in tariff mechanism, Malaysians, you can see in your electricity bills, whether you are individual or industry, if you use more than 300 kilowatt per month, your bill will be added 1.6% of the additional bill for the renewable energy fund. I don't know, some of you may face, maybe not realize, but those are coming from industry, definitely you have been faced. For my case, I also faced twice or three times. Even though it's not a big issues, big amount of the ringgit, but it will help to motivate you to reduce the energy, energy consumptions, to motivate you to reduce the energy savings. So this is some sort of economic instruments have been used to reduce the energy consumption as well as greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, I just would like to mention the 11th Malaysia Plan, which is the latest Malaysian development plan. The duration is 2016 to 2020. So the 11th Malaysia Plan also has been ensured the efficient use of energy in buildings, industries, households, and also low carbon or green cities, and implement infrastructures, especially for the electricity sector, smart grids. So these are the measures also has been emphasized in the 11th Malaysia Plan, where also has been given emphasis on adaptations. So climate change adaptations and disaster risk management also has been emphasized to protect the environment, to protect the well-being, and to protect the biodiversity. So these are the things has been mentioned in the 11th Malaysia Plan. One of the approaches has been introduced in 11th Malaysia, which is really important, which is sustainable consumption and production approach, which is one of the very important approach to achieve green growth, which will lead to a low carbon economy. You can have a look the 11 indicators which will help to assess the impact of sustainable consumption and production on the economy, society, and environment, which is really very good approach. This approach is not for the economic approach. This approach is a transdisciplinary or integrated approach of economics, environment, and social. So again, as Malaysia has committed, I have mentioned to you the pledge of 45% emission intensity reductions. So how far they have gone. So you can, according to the latest report of biennial update report, which 2015, you can see, have a look, Malaysia has already achieved 33% reduction of carbon emission intensity. Just again mark now, this is carbon emission intensity, that means carbon emissions has been divided by the GDP. Okay, so but how this emissions reduction has been came in, because this reductions came in mostly from the land use change and forestry, which are huge coming from the sinks carbon emissions absorbed in the forestry sectors. So you can have a look, some of the measures are which help to reduce the Malaysians' 33% emission intensity reductions. Definitely the hues coming from the sustainable forest management, that means the sinks of carbon emissions in the Malaysians forestry, as well as coming from some of the measures or actions taken on renewable energy and energy efficiency. So here I just would like to mention one of the very important economic instrument or economic tool is REDD+. Some of you may heard. REDD+ is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, which is basically provide the incentives, economic incentives to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, especially from the forestry sectors. And REDD+, REDD was this one, plus has been added to the adaptation components, sustainable forest management, conservation of forest carbon stocks. So you can see that there are huge benefits of REDD+ in terms of emission reductions, that means climate change mitigation, in terms of adaptations as well, climate change adaptations. Okay, now I will come back that this is one of the most important part of my talk, policy perspective and economic instruments. You can have a look. I will just go through there are some policy is voluntary environmental agreements. I already mentioned that one. Malaysians 40 or 45% of emission intensity reduction is, and one of the environmental approach which is voluntary basis. So there is no force have been imposed to take this environmental approach, but there are some commitments. Okay, you can have a look some of the voluntary commitment in this Southeast Asian regions. Just later on, I'm not going to elaborate on that. There is international environmental agreements. I have already mentioned some of them is like Rio Declaration. There is in principle. So there's no legal bounding, but there is some principles or agreement is legally bounding, that is Kyoto Protocol. That means Kyoto Protocol is why we are talking about legally binding, because legal implications can be taken if you are not implemented that, or if you are not followed this Kyoto Protocol. Even though we know that, I just would like to say that what is Kyoto Protocol? Kyoto Protocol is a legally binding agreement under which industrialized countries should reduce their collective emissions of greenhouse gas emissions by 5.2% compared to the 1990. So many of us know about the Kyoto Protocol. I just would like to say here also, Kyoto Protocol has two commitment periods. So we have already expired the first commitment period 2008 to 2012. So we are at the second commitment period 2013 to 2020. But the second commitment period has been amended but not entered into the legal force. So anyway, Kyoto Protocol was really based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. That means the principle was those has a historical background of greenhouse gas emission, you should take that responsibility to reduce the emissions. That means the industrialized or developed countries had that, that liable to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. But now we have another agreement which has different principles. I just would like to say that Kyoto Protocol had three major flexible mechanisms to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. One was international emission trading, which is based on developed or industrialized countries. The second one is joint implementation, also based on Annex 1, means industrialized countries. So the third one is the clean development mechanism, which is between Annex and non-Annex 1 countries. Annex 1 means industrialized countries, non-Annex 1 means developing countries. So you can have a look, Malaysia also has participated in CDM projects. And you can how the CDM mechanism works. I just let me just briefly discuss the CDM mechanisms is that finance coming from the industrialized countries to invest to the developing countries to have some sustainable development or low carbon investment, low carbon projects. So the developing countries will work on that projects to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, they will receive some investments from the developed countries. And while the developed countries benefit is they will take the certification of emission reduction, which they can take back to their countries and they can show and they can use for their Kyoto Protocol target. So that's the mechanism of clean development mechanism for the emission reductions. This was is really very good financial mechanism, but now it has been slowed down because of we have another agreement. I will share to you later on. Even though Malaysia has benefited from these investments, Malaysia has a total of 143 registered CDM projects, and which help to reduce about 24 million ton of carbon dioxide emissions reductions. So this is Malaysia also has participated under the Kyoto Protocol mechanism. Okay, so what is the new agreement? What I was telling you before, the Paris Climate Change Conference. This is the COP Conference of Parties in 21. So in this conference in 2015, 195 countries was met and decided to have a legally binding global climate deal. This is, many of them said, first ever universal, because United States was joined in this Paris Agreement. Unfortunately, early of this year, United States have been withdrawn from this Paris Agreement. Taken into decisions to proceed this Paris Agreement deal, and recently, the last 10 days before, the United Nations Conference on Climate Change has been held in Bonn, but organized by the Fiji, that is called COP23. This is the second part of the first session of Conference of Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. That means that after the Paris Agreement, this is the second Conference of Parties meeting to deal about the climate change, what they have committed in the Paris Agreement in 2015. Okay, so just allow me to that what was happened, because this is very, very recent, just 10 days before this session was ended. So that the thing is, they discuss about the development of guidelines on how to implement the Paris Agreement's provisions into the various sectors, across the, in the private sectors, public sectors, community levels, and also including the mitigations, adaptations, transparency, provision of funds, finance and capacity building and technology, which are really relevant to the developing countries. Okay. This Fiji, because the Fiji this is the first time the small island developing states organize this UN climate change conference. This is one of the achievements from the small island countries. At the same time, the Syria was announced to sign the Paris Agreement, which they did not committed during the 2015. So this is even though United States withdrew, but you can have a look, lot of things. The delegations from the United States, they have mentioned that they are, even though they have been withdrawn, but they are working on to achieve, to support some of the commitments or some of the actions to limit the global climate change by 2 degrees Celsius. I just would like to go back to one of the slides. This might be helpful to some of those, especially the government or non-government NGO organizations. There is a Green Climate Fund. We have been hearing this one more than 10 years of some, but anyway, there are fund is here. This is under the mechanism of UNFCCC, which is based in the Incheon, South Korea. So you can have a look. This Green Climate Fund is basically established to help to the climate finance, to the low emission and climate resilient investments into the developing countries to reduce their climate change actions. So this Green Climate Fund is not looking on the mitigations, looking on the adaptations aspects as well. So you can have a look that there is a $10.3 billion is already pledged, but also disbursed around 3 billion US dollar. You can see the disburse has been given to the 54 projects, and the beneficiaries is 159 million peoples are involved, and the expected emission reduction from these projects is 1 billion tons of carbon emissions. But look at who has received this one. This, you can see that these are the projects, number of projects coming from the various regions. So Asia Pacific has around 21 projects. So, but I have checked from the countries, I have seen none of them for the Malaysians. So, but Maldives, Vietnam, Bangladesh, India, many of them has been received this climate fund. So maybe this is the time for Malaysia's government to also to have a look the guidelines, to have a look the procedures, how to grab this green climate fund, especially for the adaptations. And I have checked also again the national designated authority for the Malaysia is Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. So this is one of the major things. I come to the economic instruments and market based, especially for the climate change. Many of you already heard that carbon tax or emission tax. At the same time, emission tradings. These two are the economic instruments which put a price on greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, and both is provide incentives to reduce the emissions, at the same time to minimize the cost of abatement. Abatement means cost of greenhouse gas emission reduction. So okay, but you can have a look, they have pros and cons. Emission tax basically fixes the carbon price, okay, but leaves the quantity of emissions uncertain. So it depends on the companies, or depends on the countries, or depends on the businesses who is going to implement this one. So if there is a fix of carbon price, but there is no fix on the quantity of emissions, that means if you set the too little tax on that, that means that will be will be inactive to have the maximum amount of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, emission trading has a guarantee that particular emissions amount or target can be achieved, but price in uncertainty. So that there is a pros and cons, but however, the economics, those are economics background. Economic instruments, economic methods can be applied to see these trade-offs. Cost-benefit analysis, cost-effective analysis, and utility analysis can be used to see that which one is better for what purposes. But this is just in terms of theoretically, you can have a look, emission tax versus emission trading scheme. I'm sorry, this is my hand sketch anyway. So you can have a look, the short term. This is the economic efficiency loss. This amount is economic efficiency loss due to the emission tax, emission tax employed, and this amount is economic efficiency loss of the carbon emission trading. So within the short time, I'm talking about the theoretical perspective. We haven't done any empirical study on this, but I have in my mind we can do some research on it. Okay, so in the short term, in terms of economic efficiency loss, emission tax is somehow better than emission trading. In the long run, you can have a look that in terms of economic efficiency loss, emission trading is better than emission tax. So this is some sort of policy instruments that can be applied for the policy actions in Malaysia. But before that, we really need to have some sort of economic or environmental feasibility study to impose this policy approach. Okay, this is also, again, I just would like to show cost of technologies. This is coming from the theory of economies scale. As many of us knows that at the beginning, the new technology, they have the cost is quite high, but when the economies scale is increasing, you can see the cost might be lesser than the established technology. So this can be applied for the low carbon technologies, especially of the energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies. So this is the economics of scale that can be applied. Okay, so I just would like to share also some of the policy approaches for adaptations. You can have a look the public-private partnerships for finance, loans, payments for environmental services, the risk financing mechanisms such as insurance and risk pools, energy efficiency standards. These might be some of the policy approach for climate change adaptations. Okay, I just would like to share, as my topic is really economics of climate change, as I showed you economics of mitigations, and then you can have a look the cost of adaptations. Previously, we have knew that there is that we can't reduce the residual cost, but now this is again IPCC's latest report has been reported, and then say that there is, if full adaptation is possible, and then there is no residual cost. So fully adaptation can be applied. Okay, but if when the full adaptation is not possible, there might be some residual damage cost which you can't avoid. For example, some of the limitations of technology we really can't avoid to implement to the countries where there is lack of innovation or lack of latest technologies. So now, I don't know how long I have time. So we still got, okay. So now I'm going to share, as I have talked about the global and Malaysian regional and Malaysian perspective of climate change, then I look back on the policy and economic instruments of the climate change which has been, going on. And then now this is my own interest, and I also would like to share some of our research, what we have been doing related to climate change. Okay, so at the beginning, we had some collaborations with the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, Malaysian Federation of Manufacturers, and then those are the business peoples. Came to our team, especially led by Professor Joy Jacqueline Pereira from the Lestari, and I was involved in her team. So they came to see that the global corporate managers' view on climate change. So we did a survey to see this one, and I don't know, one figure is missing here. Anyway, this figure shows that 70% of the corporate managers are aware about the climate change, and climate change is affecting in their company profits, and the rest of the 30% was not sure about that climate change is really affecting to their company or not. However, we also had some analysis to rank the motivational factors for the corporate managers to address climate change within their company. So, and this results has been published in very good journals, Mitigation and Adaptation Strategies for Global Change. You can have a look at that journals for details. But the rank was for motivational factors for the corporate managers. So education and awareness building was the first motivational factors, followed by legislation and regulations and appropriate technologies. So these three major motivational factors to address climate change at the company or business level. We have, received ERGS Exploratory Research Grant Scheme from the Ministry of Education, and then led by me. In fact, the project was Economic Approaches for Linking Disaster Risk Management and Climate Change Adaptations. This was one of I would say flagship project led by me early in my career. And then you can see that adaptation, climate change adaptation and disaster risk, there is a huge convergence, huge similarities between this. So these two approaches are really can talk each other in terms of theory, in terms of policy, in terms of actions, because both of them share the similar goals and conceptual overlaps. Both of them seek to reduce the risks and vulnerabilities. Both of them are also to build resilience to the hazards or disasters. So both of them also require the similar information systems, skills and institutional arrangements. At the same time, both of them are struggling to be mainstream into the regular development planning. So these two approaches are really really need to work or need to be integrated together. And these approaches, not only those are policymakers or the ministerial bodies are working on that, they should talk each other to address the climate change and disaster management. This is just we have developed this framework, conceptual framework. Those factors are affecting to link these two approaches, disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. You can have a look. This one, the most important factors is, I would say, that integrated approach and integrated policy, which so these are the factors which are really contributing to the linkage of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reductions. And this integrated approach and integrated policy is the main one of the factors which help to link. And also there is a coordinations and collaborations among the different sectors, stakeholders, institutions, policies and programs. Definitely there will be the vulnerable sectors should be involved in this process, and the stakeholders should be involved. Education and awareness programs between all these stakeholders should be enhanced, and effective fund allocation and disbursement. This is really important factor to integrate or to implement these linkages, and at the same time institutional capacity building. So these are the factors are really would be helpful to link CCA and DRR. This is also published in a very good journals, International Journal of Disaster Risk Reduction in Elsevier. So this is, as I mentioned in theoretically, that climate change and disaster risk management should be implemented, should be integrated. At the IPCC level, it is already started because IPCCs are coming from the scientific. So scientists are already started to talk between these two groups. You can have a look. This already climate change impacts has already adapted with the risks, hazards and vulnerability coming from the climate change and also the disasters. Okay, here as I have talked too much on mitigations, please take note that this mitigation is the word which has been used to scientific or two committees, climate change, two communities, climate change communities, disaster risk reduction or disaster management communities. But this word is carrying two different meanings. In terms of the climate change communities, mitigation is reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. When this word is coming to the disaster management communities, mitigation is the structural or non-structural measures that can reduce the impacts of disasters, reduce the risks of the disasters. So this is the, just bear in mind when we are talking about mitigations, we are talking about which perspective. Is it for climate change perspective? Is it for disaster management perspective? Okay. So I would like to share also with some of our results on the sea level rise, how this one has been impacted on the macroeconomic in Malaysia. So this we have done the CGE computable general equilibrium model to see the macroeconomic impacts of the sea level rise. So you can have a look. The agriculture sector would face a reduction of its gross domestic output. That means the gross domestic GDP is due to the sea level rise. Therefore, the policy recommendations from this study, mainstreaming climate change impacts should be into the development plan and policies in Malaysia, especially for the agricultural sectors, because we have seen the agriculture is the most vulnerable sectors due to the sea level rise. One of my research projects led by me, it was economic assessment of climate change adaptation in the coastal and water resources sectors. This was based in those are in Malaysia, you can see is in Batu Pahat district under the Johor state. So you can have a look. We have done some of the research on the valuation of willingness to pay to measure the adaptation benefits, especially for one of the adaptation is building geotube, because this was the one of the cheapest adaptation measures in the coastal areas. So this is the mechanism. I'm not going to details, but the theory behind of this willingness to pay or behind of the measuring monetary value of adaptation measures is the theory of consumer and producer surplus, and the coming from the compensating variation and equivalent variation. That means the willingness to pay and willingness to accept concepts or theory can be applied to see the benefits of adaptations at the community level. So what we have seen from the research that 75% of you can have only 13% of the local communities in the Batu Pahat district were willing to pay for the adaptation measures, where most of them, the 73%, are not willing to pay. So we have identified, we have seen what are the factors that the communities are not, willing to pay. Definitely might be some of the reasons might be the limited income of these local communities, or maybe some of the 54% of our respondents are coming from the low to lower middle income. Their income is less than 3,000 ringgit, and also maybe lack of education and awareness. However, one of the important findings we found that 57% respondents, the communities, people are open that there is a need for climate financing. That means the adaptation funds, and they think that adaptation initiatives should be taken by the governments. So therefore, the economics of this willingness to pay is the findings coming from adaptation measures according to the community peoples is a public goods and services. Therefore, the communities are not willing to pay for improvement of this, the coastal erosions or inundations as well. So we have another study led by me also, this one FRGS, Fundamental Research Grants from the Ministry of Education. So from that research we have seen that the feasibility study of low carbon technology low carbon technology here is mainly mentioned renewable energy and energy efficiency, and we have seen the relationship between carbon emissions and GDP. We found that the study based on the 40 years data, we found there is the opposite environmental goodness curves of the relationship. Basically, environmental goodness curve, those are not from the economic backgrounds. You can have a look that within the increasement of economic development, the environmental degradation increase. At that time, once you are quite, industrial economics or development is quite stable, you reach at the decreasing of your environmental degradations. So this is called the environmental goodness curve. So you can see we found for the Malaysians is the opposite. That means increasing of GDP also increases greenhouse gas emissions. This is probably because of maybe Malaysia is still developing countries, or maybe because of the lack of the implementation low carbon technologies. So therefore, the findings shows that significant transformation of low carbon technologies, for example, renewable energy and energy efficiency, could contribute to reduce the emissions, at the same time sustain the long run economic growth. So this is one of the results from that projects FRGS. We saw as earlier in my projects, I have mentioned to you that the Malaysian government has projected some of the emission reduction scenarios. So this is one of the things is using 7.8% share of renewable energy in the energy sources, and also using 5% share of biodiesel. So we have gone through the computable general equilibrium model, and we found that these two policies are really decoupling with the economic growth. You can see all the negative carbon emissions. At the same time, the economic growth does not have impacts, So economic growth does not have hampered or damaged due to these two policies, renewable energy and also biodiesel share in the transport sector. So, and also we did some of to support this macroeconomic analysis, we did cost benefit analysis, which also support to this macroeconomic analysis, and we found that both policy targets ensure reduction of carbon emission without harming the GDP. Okay, this is one of, I think, our flagship research, which is called Arus Padana project, led by me as well. So this is, we are looking at the climate, coastal vulnerability assessment due to the climate change in the towards the sustainable community in Malaysia. The place is in the Kuantan state, Pahang state in Kuantan. You can have a look here. This is the Peninsula Malaysia, and the place is here. We are looking at the low-lying coastal areas from Chachim to Pekan. These are the areas has been mentioned for our study. Basically the study will, ultimate findings of this study will be the development of integrated coastal vulnerability index and adaptation strategies. And our collaborator is National Hydraulic Research Institute of Malaysia, NAHRIM, is collaborating with us. So we can have a look. This is the the methodological frameworks and outcomes of this project. This is the first time I would say we are applying the integrated coastal vulnerability index we are developing. So here you can have a look physical parameters led by the physical engineers group. This is the environmental parameters led by the environmental experts, and this is the economic parameters which I am also leading on that. And also we have that this is the first time socio-cultural parameters we have included in the integrated coastal vulnerability index. So this is, we are at the middle of developing this integrated coastal vulnerability index, and therefore we are also developing the adaptation strategies for different stakeholders. So the ultimate outcome of our project also, we are developing the guidelines for sustainable coastal community. So you can have a look. Just okay, so you have been hearing from the two gentlemen from the community. This community is the Kampung Sepat and Kampung Balok in the Kuantan state, Kuantan district. Okay, and then so the first gentleman was in fact Yang Bahagia Datu Haji Shafiq Fauzan bin Sharif. So we are blessed to get him in our focus group discussions with the coastal community. He is the EXCO of the Rural Development, Agriculture and Industrial Land Development in the Pahang states. So you can have a look from the focus group discussion from the community peoples. We have, this is just from my own notes from the focus group discussion we just held early of this month, November 2017. So that some of the issues, the first gentleman, this guy was Yang Bahagia Datu was mentioning that because of some of the development activities are caused also to the coastal erosions. So therefore he was recommending that we should have the buffer zone to protect the coastal areas, to protect the environment, to protect the communities over there. So this is one of the one of the recommendations. This might be one of the adaptation measures coming from the coastal community, coastal peoples. The second one also mentioned the similar kind. They mentioned the development activities. So that means the development activities which did not consider the coastal areas because of some of the development activities are going on very near to the sea, within 100 meters or within 200 meters. So the communities, peoples, I think this may cause more to the erosions, more to the inundations and all these environmental and climate change problems. So this is also again, so should have some buffer zone, should have some restrictions to ban the plain lands to build the infrastructure and developments within maybe 1 kilometer. So these are some of the issues came from the coastal community peoples, how to address the climate change adaptations to reduce the impacts or vulnerability of climate change in the coastal areas. And some of the issues also came because the fishermen, they said that the fishing activities, the fishing, decreases and their income has been decreases, so there should have some financial support from the governments to have to do some at the large level of fishing, or maybe the fishing boats and all the equipments they can get. So some of the recommendations came from the community levels, which we are going to take into account for developing the guidelines for coastal community, sustainable coastal community. Okay, similar kind of study, but not that similar. This is also led by me, TRGS project, Transdisciplinary Research Grant Scheme from the Ministry of Education. You can have a look. We are going to do here economic analysis of coastal vulnerability due to sea level rise and cost-benefit analysis of climate change adaptation measures. So this is the areas in the Selangor coastal areas. You can have a look. The areas are here. So we are going to apply here ecosystem and community-based approach. So where the areas will be the coastal areas, and the community peoples will raise their voice and involve to the coastal vulnerability and adaptation issues. Where I'm also going to do the economic analysis is very, very complex, because this is the approach we are following, a transdisciplinary approach. So you cannot see only the economic components here. You can see having the physical components. The engineers will be working here. So we are based on these physical groups research findings as well. So they are going to project the sea level rise projections in that areas. After that, we are going to estimate the sea level rise impacts with adaptation, without adaptations, and then we are going to assess the vulnerability in terms of economics, dollar and cents, how much dollar and cents is going to cost due to the sea level rise. And we are going to do also consider the direct benefits, indirect benefits, as well as intangible benefits, direct cost, indirect cost, and intangible cost. So there is a huge methodology has been integrated to do this economic analysis of coastal vulnerability and cost benefit analysis of adaptation measures. Okay, this is one of the projects. I was co-researcher with Professor Nizam Said, who is sitting here. So this is the training material development on climate change education for the small island developing states in Asia Pacific. So we have developed the training material. This was funded by the UNESCO Jakarta. The training material is already published there, and it is available at the website, UNESCO's website. So we have developed the training material, and where I was in charge for that module 4 for the responses and efforts to address the climate change. So this is one of the aspects really important to the education sector, climate change education, which can begin from the primary to secondary and tertiary levels. So this was meant for the trainers of teachers in the primary and secondary primary schools. So this can be replicated to the Malaysia and other countries as well. Okay, this is my last slides. Is quite complex as well. You can have a look. As I talk about at the beginning, I talk about the sustainable development. So this is the sustainable development goals, which has been taken into consideration during the United Nations Summits in 2015. These sustainable development goals would help to transform the world by 2030. So these are the 17 sustainable development goals, okay, where most of the countries under the United Nations has been signed to ratify this, okay. And then I mentioned already the Paris Agreement on climate change in 2005 again most of the countries has been signed to limit the global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. Okay. We have another one is post-2015 framework for disaster risk reduction, which was again came into 2015. So in the 2015, the year of 2015 has 3 major global commitments. So DRRs, SDGs, and Paris Agreement. So how far? So that means most of the countries has been signed and ratified, these 3 global commitments. So how the countries, how the stakeholders could be work on it? To me, there should have coordination, because many of the overlapping climate change issues are here in the disasters, and disaster issues in the climate change. And definitely the climate change is one of the SDGs in the SDG initiatives. And disaster components also are cross-sectoral in many SDG goals. So, these are how the countries, how the companies, how the businesses, how the industries are going to address these 3 issues, where all the countries are liable to the global community. So this is my own thinking. We are liable to the global communities to address these 3 major issues. Okay, so therefore, this is my opinion. There should have coordinations, cooperations, financing, integration, and partnerships to address these 3 major commitments. And there are many overlaps. There are many issues can be resolved by integration of the responses. Okay. Then I just would like to say some of the considerations for the transition to a low carbon and sustainable economy. Definitely education, awareness, and communications could play an important role to the transitions to the low carbon and sustainable economy, what we would like to go. And then there is need to have decoupling economic growth with not only environment, with the societal well-being. And not only society, we should have environmental components there. So this is very, very tough for the policymakers to how to decouple the economic growth with the environment and social well-being. Okay, and as we have seen that there is a transition to a low carbon and sustainable economy or sustainable development, there might be some challenges for competitiveness and also opportunities for growth, especially for the innovation for new technologies, especially for the businesses, especially for the new market products, especially for the new markets for the low carbon technologies. So these are the things countries and companies or individual businesses should have positioned themselves to grab or to identify the challenges, to grab the opportunities. Okay, I just would like to say again that we know already there are many technologies, those are low carbon and sustainable technologies such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, carbon capture and storage, green growth policies, which are really effective to reduce the environmental burden, to reduce the environmental impacts, to reduce the emissions. Are we really implying on this one? So there is the effective usage of this technology should be taken into account. And then also, especially for the developing countries or least developed countries, they should have adequate technical and financial supports during these transitions. Okay, and then this is my personal opinion also. Whenever I see the policies should be built on diverse national and local conditions. It should not be built on from the top down, from the global community. There is the commitment for the global community, but the policies for the countries, policies for the local levels should be built on their own characteristics, on diversified conditions. Okay. And so this is very, very important as an economics. I can say the policy should be linked between current actions, what we are doing now, and for the long-term goal. What is our goal, ultimate goal? So policies should not be focused only the short-term actions, should be focused on the long-term actions as well, long-term goals. Okay, and then this is the thing is really important, especially for Malaysia, because we have seen there are policies, there are actions but the implementation is somehow question mark. So the implementation of proper policy approach and responses, those are really important to fortify the nation's and community resilience, especially towards low carbon and sustainable economy. Okay, and this is for the, I think, R&D. This is really has an huge impacts inter and transdisciplinary research and development, which need to be taken into account. This is the time for engineers, scientists, sociologists, lawyers should work together into the inter and transdisciplinary research, because the problems we are facing now is really complex, really dynamics. So all of us need to be together. I just would like to share with you my experience. I visited last month in Kumamoto University, and I was very, very impressed to see that they have the faculty of advanced science and technology. This faculty was built on interdisciplinary researchers, interdisciplinary expertise, interdisciplinary. So this faculty is really working cross disciplines. Nobody is there like, okay, this is engineering faculty, this is science faculty. No, I was really impressed to see, because I was there, visited three to 4 days. So it's opened up my mind. As an economist, I am also very, very blessed to work with different disciplines, engineers, scientists, and lawyers, and policymakers, communities. But this, how they have the faculty itself in a university where they have the interdisciplinary faculty, because this that faculty where I was visited looking into the climate change and disaster aspects. So they are looking on really doing the research on inter and transdisciplinary. We have been started here in UCAM as well, but we are still facing some of the constraints to work together in an inter and transdisciplinary research. My last statement for this talk is, as we know that climate change, it is a global environmental problem. But these problems need to be addressed at the global, regional, national, local, community, and individual levels. None of us can escape from this liability, because climate change is a trans-border issue, global issues, but impact to us, everyone. So with that, thank you very much.